into their possession. So instead of retiring it, they get to keep it. You know, it becomes their property. Though they never gave up any lawful consideration, it's obfuscated from a promissory obligation, which is actually to pay the money out of circulation, into a debt to them, though they gave up nothing. So you might issue $100,000 into circulation. It costs you $2 for the paper, you see, and you collect $100,000 in principal. Then you collect $300,000 on interest on a $2 expense, you see, which is paid back in a tiny fraction of the first payment, you see. And then by this whole obfuscation, you're also requiring us to perpetually maintain a vital circulation by perpetually reborrowing an interest and principal that we're paying out of the circulation, perpetually increasing the sum of debt until we suffer a terminal sum of debt, which is happening right now. It's the stupidity of mankind. So we also understand from this obfuscation, which is terminal, which actually imposes all these injustices. We solve all these problems simply by getting rid of the banks, creating our own equivalent, which, yes, issues the $100,000 into circulation at a cost of $2 a paper. Yes, okay. But those $2 of costs are paid for by paying back $102,000. Okay, but the $102,000 would be introduced into circulation because that's how much would be $100,002 would be introduced into circulation, because that would be accounting for the whole thing then. So mathematically perfected economy is an eradication of interest, an obligatory schedule of payment, which pays the principal out of circulation according to the rightful nature of a promissory obligation. So it solves inflation, deflation, systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property, which is solved by the combination of the solution to inflation and deflation and the third categoric fault, which is inherent multiplication of artificial indebtedness by interest. So this isn't even a debt to the bankers. They're merely publishers of the evidence of our promissory obligations to each other, which obligation is to pay the principal out of circulation as we consume of the property. Now, the banking system claims it deserves interest, but it denies the real creditor interest. The real creditor is the person that gives up whatever you spend the $100,000 debt for. A $100,000 home, builder of the $100,000 home gets the $100,000. The banking system denies the real creditor interest, and it pretends to be a creditor while it does nothing but publish the evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. So this transition to mathematically perfected economy, which I originally provided in my documentation to the Reagan campaign, I provided Reagan a proof of a singular just means of converting any of these lies of economy, these things that we call economy wrongly, which are the consequence of this obfuscation of the currency, money changing, for the purpose of exploitation, which happens to be terminal. In the end, it dispossesses all of us of everything and renders a complete defeasance of all our industry. So this transition to mathematically perfected economies is accomplished simply by refinancing all of our debts, counting all prior payments of interest instead toward principal, and then subjecting the remaining principal, if any. You see, just that first part alone solves most of the debt of the world. If you've been paying for years on a home, you're probably 12 times that many years ahead on your payments under mathematically perfected economy. The mathematically perfected under mathematically perfected economy, a $100,000 home with a 100-year lifespan costs us $1,000 a year, or $83.33 a month. If you bought this home under this present system, your monthly payments would be about $1,000 a month, or even more. 12 times as much. And so for this immediate transition to mathematically perfected economy, we wouldn't be suffering unemployment, we wouldn't be suffering foreclosure, we wouldn't be suffering expatriation of our industry and trade deficits and government deficits and this further accumulation of all public debt and needs for rescues, which only accumulate further debt beyond an already terminal sum of debt. Instead, without even any increase in circulation, just by refinancing our debts in mathematically perfected economy and not even realizing any of the further prosperity that we would realize by financing further production, restoring our production, going back to work, and all these other things, repairing the consequences of this lie of economy, this immediate transformation into mathematically perfected economy, we have about 12 times as much prosperity without changing anything else. So we accomplish this simply by refinancing our debts without interest, counting all prior payments of interest toward principal, which restores our debts to the actual state that they would be under a promissory obligation, which is what they are. We have an obfuscation of our promissory obligations, which is actually entirely unlawful. It's unlawful at least because it's against the Constitution, and it's also unlawful at least because the banking system never gave up any lawful consideration to consider any of this a debt to itself. These debts don't exist. So when we say, well, who would loan us money if it wasn't subject to interest? That's a matter of our own stupidity. We believed the lie, and it's a terrible lie. It's a destructive lie. It's a lie that you cannot avoid the consequences of. It makes us all pay, and it makes us all pay dearly to an ever greater degree and to an ultimately, inevitably, totally destructive degree. The group wanted to take a break here, and I went on discussing some of these issues during the break, so I thought I might preserve some of those remarks from the interview, which weren't intended to be broadcast. And so part of it is, this foundation thing. I don't let myself get trapped into doing it otherwise. People think, oh, just give us the 3-second soundbite, and I'm sorry, it's not there for you, and you're not there for it, so I'd rather, pass on that. And I know I don't have to explain it to people, but I think it helps if I do articulate it.
Yes.
Because then people realize that we're all on the same page, and that this is an issue that you just can't go for 20 minutes and stop, or 15 minutes and stop, or 10 minutes and stop, I frankly like the idea of letting the material dictate the presentation. We could talk about it forever, but there's actually a tremendous history in my web presence, starting from 1983 and 4. I put my material up on 10 years before there was an internet. It was up on public bulletin boards at colleges, binaries and software code for the very models I provided the Reagan administration, which predicted that the economy would crash in last year. And that was a conservative projection, and in truth, it was crashed before that too. That's why Bush had to start rescuing it. And all these things do is push the debt far beyond an already terminal sum of debt and an unrecoverable situation. Now, the truth of the matter is, they could just pour money, drive around in trucks with the tailgates down and dump money through the streets and everything, and we would seem to have a recovery for a while, but we're paying it out of circulation so fast that they really need to make a regular practice of that. It's preposterous, the math of any way of persisting in this. I'm just I'm paying attention to all the lies, but if you go back to 1929 and 30, all this crap has been done before. They're just repeating the same pattern with a little bit further twist. That, it's my. You really need to know my history intimately to realize how profoundly I might have affected so many people. There's a story where Bernanke responds to, forget which, Milton Friedman, I think it was, and his wife admitting that they caused the Great Depression. Well, Friedman has sort of plagiarized me, as Paul Krugman has, and I warned Paul Krugman about it, and and he's backed off. And but anyway, I had a paper on that I'd submitted Reagan, and the title of it was "Mathematic Proof" in all caps that the so-called Federal Reserve System caused the first Great Depression. And
Mike, we were hoping, because we're all enthralled on this end, and so glad to have you. We're hoping that you would go ahead and do another full lapse, if you would, and cover those are critical issues you touched on in the show. You touched on the issues under Andrew Jackson and the central banker Biddle, and what they did was, what I know of history is that they did the same thing then that the expansion and contraction of credit, which through the country, and it was done as a punishment to Andrew Jackson for having let the charter expire, and then they did it again, and that is what brought on the Depression again. First, it was the false panic of 1908 that Morgan and his cohorts pulled off Aldrich to get the Federal Reserve Act passed, and then through the expansion and contraction of credit, they brought on the Depression. Which brought us into World War World War II.
Yeah, I don't know if any other authors actually had exposed that, but
I hope you will.
When we resume, and you guys can let me know whenever you want. I'll let you lead me into whatever you want there, and I'll put all those pieces together for you as I see them, at least.
Okay, I'll leave that to Carl and Mark. I'm going back to mute. I just want to get my 2 cents worth. I'm
Mark,
enjoying myself.
Well, that was
Mark's
great,
taking
William.
a quick
Yeah,
break.
I'm right here.
Okay.
I'm right here. I'm right here.
I'm hanging up.
Actually, I know some of the history stuff. I'd kind of covered, although briefly, and in a summary format on the chat that I did with you guys a couple of weeks ago now. I know what I want to suggest might be worth looking into. The history is very important, of course, but what I'm thinking we should do now is tell the people what is going on that is directly affecting them, because I think right now we need to make people understand what's happening, why it's happening, and it's not affecting the guy down the street. This is affecting you, everybody, and you have to do something about it. And this is now the solution, the mathematically perfected economy.
Well, that's a good point, Carl, because one thing I wouldn't want to conclude the show without giving at least some idea of how we're going to resolve this. So, William, I think you asked that question very well. So if don't be shy about jumping in here. And
in fact, if you guys want to do kind of like a round table where all you gentlemen can speak and ask questions to each other and do kind of like a little history of how it happened. And
I think it might be hard to break into that if I'm really going to answer to William's point and Carl's point. If we cover those two bases, we can easily fill another hour in that. I'll be truncating it down, incredibly, just to get that in. I might be able to finish it in 15 minutes. I don't know. The clock in my head doesn't reflect the thinking in my head.
I know I had to truncate it when I was doing that talking, as Mark and Ann might remember, because I do actually. Yes, flew through it all and summarized as much as I possibly could, because I was trying to focus in on more of the problem.
Well,
that we're facing now.
Don't worry about time tonight. What I'm doing is we already got like a full hour. I know you don't realize it, but we already have a full hour. So
no, I glanced at the clock when we started. The thing is, I've been doing this all my life, and there's actually parts of this story you just wouldn't believe. I mean, there are things that we could focus on for days at a time, or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 hour shows at a time. And those things are also critical to cover. We're doing a minimal summary here. The two things that William brought up, the
charter, central bank charter.
Yeah, the history. Well, start at Jackson. Let's dive in at Jackson. And
well, I'll start the show, and we can start and just cover it
and then
real quick.
The other point I wanted to make sure we understand is